This is episode number 48 of the Navigating Baby Loss podcast. And today it's just me. I wanted to talk to you today about fathers and their role in grief. We're beginning the month of Father's Day where we honor our fathers, the fathers of our children. And I think it's just a really great time to recognize these often, sometimes overlooked people in our lives who share in our grief. It can be really, really complicated. It can seem like they're grieving very differently, and I think they are. But I just really wanted to talk about all of the fathers, whether that's your partner, your husband, whether it's a father figure, whatever it is. I'd like to spend a little time recognizing their grief and discussing some things that might be helpful in helping you celebrate them this month as we do come upon Father's Day holiday. And maybe it's just in general to see a little bit different side of some things that they're experiencing. I really want to share a story with you. If any of you have been listening to me for any period of time or know anything about me, you'll know that my parents had a child before me who was stillborn. She died during birth, at birth, and oh gosh, let's see. She would have been about 55 or 56 years old right now, at this point in time. And at that time, my parents were in the service. My dad was in the Air Force, my mom was working, and my father had orders to go to Vietnam, to the Vietnam War. And after their baby died, the service pulled the orders and they didn't have him go to Vietnam because they were unsure about my mother's mental stability, which is understandable right after you lose a baby. So I know throughout the years that this was always a little bit of a weird feeling with him because we all know Vietnam and the stories that have come out of there. And there was some guilt that he didn't go and his platoon mates did. He didn't go when everyone else had to. I'm not really sure what he thought too much about it. He isn't one to talk about these things too much. But during the time I was growing up, we would hear him talk about it very little. My mother was very, very open about the loss of their baby, and he would sometimes be in the room with the conversation, but not really add a lot to it. And fast forward to 70, he just celebrated his 78th birthday. And he's now in therapy because he's having some severe issues with depression. What they've found is the root cause of it is that it is resulting from all of the changes in his life that happened due to the death of this baby, their stillborn baby, 57 years ago. So I think it's really not an accident that this is my passion and my line of work, but it's really interesting that of all the things that happened in his lifetime, good and bad, the thing that really is at the root of his depression that he's experiencing is because of his stillborn baby. So I think it just really shows us that men also need to process their grief. And because of his unprocessed grief, he is now nearing the end of his life, wondering how things would have been different, how drastically different his life would have been had that baby lived. I think it's just something for us to think about, something to encourage the men in our lives or the fathers or whoever is on the other side of this baby loss with us to really be willing to process their grief and for us to help them do that. I think with Father's Day coming up, it's definitely a time to open up some communication for us, to allow some conversation about it, to encourage some conversation, to check in with them to see how it is that they really are doing in the midst of their loss. And as I'm saying this, I'm realizing that what I should have done is had my husband on this interview today and interview with him. So maybe stay tuned. Maybe there's going to be a part 2 to this because he's out of town for work right now. But when he gets home, I might do a little bonus episode on this topic because I think he would have some really great insight on what this has looked like for us. So if you have any questions that you would like me to ask him, I would love for you to find me on Instagram at Navigating Baby Loss and send me a message and I will ask him some questions. You can get some insight from him on the father's side of loss directly from my husband and the transformation that he has seen me go throughout all of this experience from day one. So, the first thing I want to talk about is I get asked questions all the time from women about how to help their husband, how to help the father of the baby with their grief. And the first thing I want to say about that is always let them know that you acknowledge the loss. Like, acknowledge that they've had as much of a loss as we have. I think it's very common for people to look at the woman and give her all of the attention and all of the sympathy because it happened in our bodies. And then you typically have a man who's trying to be strong for us. So they're really not acknowledging any of their own grief because they, number one, don't want to upset us, or they just don't want the attention on them. They don't want the attention on them, so they end up skipping over any acknowledgement of the grief that they're feeling, the loss that they've suffered, and which is also their loss. What I've found out is lots of times their loss feels different than us because they're mourning the loss of the future, like daddy's little princess or their little baseball player or whatever it is that they're envisioning. Lots of times they envision a little bit older of a child than the mother does when they're thinking about the loss. But really acknowledging if you're able to have a conversation, acknowledge what they also lost. And maybe even say something that sounds like, I know that this is something that happened in my body, but I am very, very aware that this was also a huge loss for you. Even just saying something like that could really open up a whole new line of communication. So I think acknowledging it verbally is really important, letting him know that you understand he's grieving and that you recognize the loss he's suffering. And maybe because it's Father's Day coming up, there might be a gift that you would like to give him. Everyone's different, of course. Maybe it's a card, maybe it's some sort of flowers or plant. I've seen a lot of jewelry. There's like necklace charms, and I saw one the other day that I really liked too, that was like a leather bracelet, a men's leather braided bracelet, and it had a little metal bead on it that you could put the baby's name on it. Maybe it's a tattoo. I don't know. Everybody's different and has different ideas of what might be a meaningful gift to them. But whether it's your first Father's Day without your baby or your 15th Father's Day without your baby, you can always acknowledge it. I think it's always okay to acknowledge it and have a gift for them because we know that we're mothers no matter what, and they are fathers no matter what, just the same. So letting them know that their grief is okay and it's valid is really, really meaningful. Another thing would be to provide support for them, listening to them, engaging in conversation. I'll link it in the show notes, but I have a free resource that's called the Communication Cheat Sheet. What it is basically inside of there's a list of questions that you can ask your partner to open up some conversation starters. Because lots of times they're not going to be the ones to bring it up. Lots of times they're going to steer away from those kinds of conversations because they either don't want to get emotional or they don't want to make you emotional. It's easier to put it aside, but it's not, as we know, as I know firsthand, it can take a lifelong toll on you, and it's still there. Just like our grief, it's still there, and it's still there for them. So definitely listening is a huge gift to them. Encourage them in conversation. And some of my conversation starters are asking them things like, what is the thing that you're going to miss most about having this baby? What was the thing that you were looking forward to the most about having a new baby or a child? And then just listen. That's so important. Just being willing to have those conversations means so much. And just like we want someone to listen, so do they. If you didn't want to do a gift or something, you could also make a donation to some sort of charity or something that's meaningful to you. Maybe something that honors fathers. There might be Father's Day events in your area that would be meaningful. The father, your husband or whoever, that would be something meaningful and special to them. Make a donation or do some sort of volunteer activity in honor of your baby. I actually just went to a child loss symposium, and there were about 80 children who were represented in this gathering in my city. And it was really interesting because there were not a lot of men there. They were mostly the moms, but not a lot of men. I would say probably less than half, maybe half of the parents attending were men. So I really think that it's something it's definitely not easy for men to deal with. I think for women, we're much more likely to try to find someone to talk about it to, or we have a close friend, or we have sisters, or someone we can talk about things with. And with men, that whole relationship is a lot harder. I want you to be willing to reach out. I would love to encourage you to reach out to a father that you know that might be grieving and offer your support, offer to listen, offer to hear what their experience was of their baby. My husband has a very different story of what took place that day than I do. He got stuck with doing a lot of the phone calling and the telling and the standing strong and taking care of business part of the whole thing for many days in order to support me. He found comfort in that in his own way, and that was his comfort, was helping me through it and being my support. But who was comforting him? I can't imagine how valuable it would be able to return that favor to someone who had been there for you and had seen you through this experience. The ideal place to get in this whole thing, the ideal place to get to in this whole thing, the ideal place to get to in this whole thing would be for you both to acknowledge the loss. Acknowledge who's missing, what you're missing out on, and doing it together, which I think is where we're at this point in time. I will admit most of the time, it's me that's the reminder of like, oh gosh, today they would have been this old, or today they would have been graduating sixth grade, or whatever it is. Or I wonder what colleges they've been choosing. And it's typically me that brings these things up, but he definitely indulges in those thoughts with me. He definitely will chime in with a couple of ideas, and it's really helpful. I think it's helpful for him and it's helpful for me because I do think your relationship suffers when you have a loss because of the difference in grief, the difference in how of it, the way it takes place, because it happens to your body. They do take a back seat, and they are the forgotten ones. So if you don't acknowledge that they're also grieving, it can really start to cause some resentment. So acknowledge that they are a father whether they have any other children or not. Acknowledge that it's okay for them to grieve. It's okay for them to cry and grieve openly. And it's okay for them to honor their child's memory, and that you will honor them as the father. There's a page on Instagram that I follow. I love them. They're called the Sad Dads Club. I'll link them in my show notes too. And they're really great to follow. They sometimes have interviews on Instagram of different fathers that they interview. It's really great to have that father's perspective and listen to the things that they think of and talk about, because it's similar in a lot of ways, but also different from what women think of. So we're used to how we think of things and our own grief, that sometimes we forget that it's definitely something that they are grieving too. So I will link my friends, Sad Dads Club, in the show notes. And they're just really down to earth, normal guys who are three friends, and they all had stillborn babies within a very short time of each other. So they talk a lot about their journey, what they're doing to create awareness and help each other as they help others. So it's really great. I do have some statistics too, because I love a good statistic. And here's something that's never talked about. And again, going back to what my father's challenge is right now, is that fathers of a stillborn baby have a close to a 5-fold risk of suffering anxiety and depression 2 months after their stillbirth compared to fathers who've had a live birth. So of all the fathers, stillbirths and live births, the fathers that had stillbirths are 5 times more likely to have to suffer and deal with anxiety that is affecting them. So also, the other statistic is, if the father is refusing to discuss stillbirth, it increases the mother's risk for postpartum depression and anxiety. So if for no other reason at all, in order to help each other, just help each other. Help each other grieve, help each other talk through it. And I know there's some that don't want to talk about it at all, and that's normal too. But if you can get them to keep thinking about it, keep trying to open up that communication, it will be much healthier for both of you. There's really health implications that you both will be much better off. If you can discuss this, acknowledge them, acknowledge that they are a father on Father's Day, send them a card, buy them a gift, think of something special to do to celebrate Father's Day, whatever it is this month. Provide support, listen. Be willing to listen and ask questions, get curious. Let them know that it's safe to talk about it around you. Make a donation, do something meaningful that helps you both. And in the process, remembering your child, reach out. Reach out and remember other people's children that you know have experienced stillbirth. Show them that you care. Show them that you're supportive of them. If it's a friend or family member, let them know that you're thinking of them on Father's Day and that it means a lot that they are still a father. And just in general, do what you can to evolve in your relationship. In closing, I want to say that the whole grief difference between mothers and fathers of babies who are lost is probably one of the most challenging things that we face. And it can be very destructive if it's not dealt with properly. So I'm really urging you to figure out what style of grief is your partner. It's nothing that we ever thought we'd have to learn about one another. It's definitely nothing that was ever covered in premarital counseling or while you're dating. No one would ever have any idea of knowing what each other's grief style is. But in these circumstances, you find out really, really quickly that keeping the communication open as much as you can is vital. So again, I will link my free resource in the show notes for my communication cheat sheet. I will link the Sad Dads Club. I think they have some great information. And let me know any questions that you would like to hear my husband answer. He doesn't know it yet, but I think he could be a great guest on a future podcast all about fathers and of husbands living with the new wife that they got the day their babies were lost. So I'm sending all of the fathers in any capacity so much love and admiration. And fathers of babies who are lost deserve some extra special care on Father's Day. Until next time, I'm hoping that you are finding comfort as you are navigating your baby loss.